Are you a selfish giver or do you give with no strings attached? Well, the answer to that question might not be obvious because you might be like me and not even realize that you give with a condition, something that's attached to it for maybe down the line in the future or because of some other reason other than just giving from your heart. Now, one of the things that I like to think about, and I've done this in relationships in the past, is I would be keeping score. I would be keeping score about good things and bad things. When it comes to giving or just, interactions in general, or like letting someone get away with something, it's like, hey, I did this thing for you. I gave you this and you've only given me that, right? So as I've given you two things, you've only given me one. You owe me one, right? You owe me something because I did this thing for you. Well, giving benevolently, giving generously, giving without any strings attached, you get rid of that scorecard, you get rid of the score sheet, and you just give to give. And that's what giving is all about. If you're giving and it's a condition, hey, I'm only giving to this person because I want to receive something in return, that's not giving. That's a transaction. That's a payment. And I'm so guilty of being in relationships and keeping score and keeping tabs and not just giving away. Now, what can happen though is it can be a one-way street where you give and you never get anything back. Well, then you have to end the relationship. Well, what did I do? Instead of just ending the relationship and saying, hey, this isn't working out. I'm giving because I love you. And then now I don't get anything in return. As a matter of fact, all I get in return is stress and worry, and you're not doing enough. Well, that's not fair, right? You know what I mean? So there's boundaries, but what I'm talking about is when you always, or when you are always making the connection of I'm going to give to get, I'm going to give to keep score so that I can make sure that it's a balance. Life isn't fair. I've talked about this in other videos. Life isn't fair, but if you're constantly looking for things to be fair, you're gonna be disappointed. And in some relationships, you're always gonna give more than you get. Think about having a kid. Think about having a kid. If you expect that kid to repay you for everything that you've done for them, that you've raised them and paid for their diapers and paid for their clothes and paid for their shoes and paid for their school and paid for, you're never going to get enough in return. But that's what life is about. You don't have to repay the debt to this person that gave it to you necessarily. You pay it forward. You pay it on to the next person. And I think that is what we have to think about in regard to giving. If I'm always giving because I have these expectations in return, I'm going to be left wanting, and it's never going to happen. And especially with people that you love. Because if you're going to then keep score on them, you're going to start building up resentments. That's what I did. I built up resentments toward the person. And guess what? They built up a resentment towards me because they realized that I was keeping score and I wasn't just giving to give. So when you put these conditions on your giving, and you might be doing it subconsciously. Again, I was doing this for years and I had no idea what I was doing. And I was always upset and I didn't want to give. Sometimes that's what would happen. I would do something for someone, I would give something to someone, or I would do something generously, like vacuum the house or wash the dishes or do something for someone that you didn't have to, and you did it, but you didn't do it because you actually wanted to help that person. You did it so that later on you could say, well, I did the dishes for you. They didn't ask. So that's what ends up happening is you then start doing these things, and then that person goes, well, I didn't ask you to do that. Why are you holding that over my head? It's because of coming from that point of view of keeping score. Hey, I did this for you. I need this expectation in return. And that's not giving. That's a transaction. And if you can start to look for these things and also look for those moments of, hey, I don't want to give to this person because I don't feel like the relationship is healthy. I'm just giving and I'm not getting anything in return. And that's not a good place to be. I'm not saying that it needs to be equal, but when you don't get anything in return and you feel like you're being used, that's a bad place to be. So that's when you then need to examine, do I want to keep this relationship around? Then if you do have these resentments, you talk about them and you say, look, I've been doing these things and now I'm getting to the point where I don't even want to do them to do them. All right. For you, I'm doing them only because, right, I have these resentments against you and I want to look better in the relationship so that when we get in an argument, I can hold this over you. That's not healthy. Hey, how can we fix this? So if you can see what you're doing and start to point it out and then have an actual conversation about it instead of an argument, that's what I would do, right? Something would happen and then they would say, well, you don't do this for me. And then I would go, oh yeah, well, look at all this stuff that I would do for you. And then it's like this big blast and oh, I do this for you. No, I do this for you. And you battle back and forth. And it doesn't get you anywhere. And I've noticed that, a lot of times that can happen where you're holding these things over someone so that when you have that argument, you're ready. And that was me. I wouldn't say a word. I would do all these things. It would be weeks or months. And then something would happen and I would go, look at all these things that I did for you. Well, all those things now, they lose their value of giving. And then after that, that person is going to look at you going, is this person doing this because they love me? Or are they doing it because they want to have these things held over me for the right opportunity? And I think that that's just not a good place to be. But if that's where you're at, you have to communicate. Well, you don't have to, you can do whatever you want. But I'm saying in my experience, if you can communicate it and understand, hey, look, I'm building up resentment. I feel like I'm doing all these things and I'm not getting anything in return. And it's not that I want something in return, but I feel like that we don't have balance to this relationship. And it's never going to be 100%, like I said. But when it's 90-10, that's not a relationship. It's got to be in that middle ground where you're giving and someone is accepting. That's another thing. When you do something for someone and someone doesn't say thank you, that's another way where you start building up resentment. And then you go, you didn't even do this. You didn't even do that. You didn't say thank you. You didn't. And I think a lot of it is because one side starts to get this expectation that you're going to be doing things for them. And if we don't communicate about how we feel about how we do these things, then it turns into drama, it turns into fights. So if you can analyze yourself and say, hey, where am I giving from? You'll start to uncover a lot of these areas. And then you'll be like, well, instead of me just not doing these things for them anymore, I can communicate to them, hey, by the way, I'm doing this, all right? I'm not doing this anymore because you don't appreciate me. And this is how I feel. And I wanted to tell you that. That person, I think, would be a lot more open, right? Instead of you just stop, let's just talk about those examples of like cleaning the house or something like that. It's like you just stop doing it. That person's going to be pissed off. But if you express to them, hey, I don't feel like I'm getting any appreciation for these things that I've been doing for you. And so I'm not going to do them anymore. Unless if we have a conversation about, how I feel undervalued. That's a much better place to start an argument from versus, hey, why didn't you clean the house today? What's wrong with you? Well, it's because you don't even appreciate me. You can see how that fight will end up happening. But these can happen with family. These can happen with kids, your kids. Your kids, you can be doing it to your parents. There's lots of situations where we have this scoring back and forth. 2 for me, 1 for you. Hey, that's not fair. If you really want to give, and this season that we're talking about giving and Thanksgiving and Christmas, where you're giving things, I remember someone telling me, I went to their house and I gave them all these gifts and they didn't get me anything in return. Well, that's not the spirit of Christmas, of giving. That's the spirit of giving and receiving. Hey, I wanted to give something to someone so that I got something in return. Well, I'm never going back to their house because they don't give me anything. Hey, you've got this whole giving thing upside down. It's not a give to get. It's a give and, hey, I wanted to give this gift to you. If you have this gift to you, but I have a contingency that I want to get in something back, that's not giving anymore. What we want to try to focus on is giving from a vacuum. I've talked about this before. There's no reason to give. There's no request for it. It's, I saw something, I wanted to get it for you, or I wanted to give this compliment to you, or I wanted to do this thing for you out of nowhere, not because of anything other than love. That's how you then work on this paying it forward thing, where that person can then return it back to you, or they can then return that favor to other people and they can be more generous. And it's just like this big snowball that gets bigger and bigger of people giving. But if it's a give and receive, like I said, that example, I got these Christmas presents for someone, they didn't give me anything back. Guess what happens? they're not going to give anymore, right? The person that doesn't feel love because they didn't receive anything, they're not going to give anymore. The person that doesn't get anything, they're going to be like, well, this person didn't get me anything. Well, why do I have to get anybody else anything? So it makes that snowball in a negative way, makes it smaller. So the expansion of love doesn't go anywhere. It stays with the selfishness inside of each of us. And what I say is if you give without the expectation of receiving, and it's true, it's not just because you want to do it, it's magical. You actually will feel so much better when you just give to someone and go, yeah, oh, I don't want anything in return. You don't say that. Another way to do that is donating anonymously. You give and they don't even know who it comes from. It comes from a vacuum. Oh, this person doesn't even want credit for their donation. Wait, everyone wants credit. No, that's what I'm saying. We're getting the giving thing wrong. And if you're thinking about that, whether it comes from gifts, whether that comes from doing chores for someone, whether that comes from giving someone a hug or greeting someone or smiling at someone, when we do these things with the contingency and hey, I need something in return, only bad things end up happening. It becomes more and more about me and it doesn't come about we. If I give and I just keep pushing things out and away, obviously I'm going to need things in return in life. That's just how things go. But I've found that when I don't think about those things, I take care of my own shit and then I give, all of it comes together. And a matter of fact, I get a lot in return, not because I gave for any reason, but because that snowball effect will eventually boomerang back around and get to me, because that's just the energy that I'm putting out. It's that love giving versus the expectancy giving. So think about how you give, especially during this holiday season. Are you giving to someone because you have this expectation and you want this thing from them? Or are you really and truly giving just to give? Try it. Try donating anonymously. Try getting someone a gift and not having the expectation that, man, if I get them this thing, I really want them to say, oh, I love you, and it's this great thing, and here's what I got you in return. Just give without expectation and see how you feel. I bet you'll feel a lot better. You won't be so disappointed if they don't get you anything in return. You won't be disappointed if what they got you isn't the same exact price, right? And again, if you can look at this in relationships, you'll start to see, are those relationships healthy for you? Do you even really love this person, or are you just doing things because you just want to have this one up on them versus actually doing things out of love? So check out how you give. I think it's valuable in this time of year, but it's always valuable because these things have ripple effects in all areas of our life. That's it for today.